You've probably misunderstood Phrolova. She isn't evil, or at least not in a way that you think. One of the main antagonists in Renacita, Phrolova has been drip marketed to release on the upcoming version, or maybe she already released and you're watching this future, which is weird, but you can keep watching, I don't mind. There has been a debate of whether or not Phrolova is evil and if Kuro would continue to let her be evil. Because, you know, in the gacha space, apparently it's very common enough in mainstream that even evil villains, if turned playable, have to be brought on the good side. The reason for this is because apparently, according to gacha fans, villains can't be evil because the CCP will see your PP into the CUT. But this apparently isn't true, and I'll cover this later. To the topic at hand, I'll first explain why Phrolova might not be exactly evil. But I feel like I can't address this topic without first addressing the bunch of points that may or may not have started this debacle, for the least the conversation from what I know. Enter MarcoMeatball, the beloved music opera creator of the gaming niche. On one fateful day, he posted the following on Twitter.
I've been thinking about Wuthering Waves and Phrolova becoming playable. If she has a change of heart and her character moves completely from being a villain, that's it for me. If she's morally grey, questionable, then I'm okay with it. I'm just deeply concerned they're going to justify spending on characters by having them have changes of hearts, which is going to dumb down and homogenize this game massively and not have any stakes attached. She's a great villain. I really don't want her to have some tragic backstory that made her evil, but then she realizes the error of her ways. It will feel so cheap, and no matter how much love I have in my heart for this game, I just want to keep playing it.
Now, I must say, he does make some very well points, and like what I mentioned in the gacha space having a tendency to make villains into light-hearted simps for the main character, he kinda does have a point. Now, as much as I want to say my thoughts here, I think one really specific creator, whether you like him or not, pretty much sums up exactly my thoughts on this tweet as well as the general response that I had in mind. Enter Saintontas.
They're going to justify spending on characters by having them have changes of hearts, which is going to dumb down and homogenize this game massively and not have any stakes attached.
Now, whether you watch the guy's video and agree with him or not is up to you. And you could watch his video before mine because I do share a specific opinion that I share with him, but do you really want to watch another YouTube video? You might be wondering, oh wow, why are you taking Saintontas' opinion? He's a... whatever your opinion is. And I'm just here using his points because I think he's kind of spitting facts as well as kind of says the exact same things that I had in mind. So like, you know, for the sake of convenience and for the sake of views, I'm gonna be using his points because I think he can deliver it better than I can. Although we do share the same opinion for Phrolova's role, I'll rather focus on the concept of evil and how that applies to Phrolova instead of actually just talking about the character side just like Saint did. But first of all, I feel like we need to define what evil really means. Evil as a concept is defined by abhorrent, immoral behavior relating to acts that may cause unnecessary pain or suffering to other beings. This definition is very important, so we'll come back to this later. Evil is often seen as the opposite or absence of good, and I think that this is where the mix-up of evil becomes to everyone. Evil can be seen as an opposing force to good, or rather, something that causes harm to something good. When it comes to writing, evil is portrayed as the force that goes against the good guys, which now brings a blurry line on what is evil and what is good according to the perspective of the viewer. And that overcomplicates it with evil and good protagonists, evil and good antagonists, villains, and whatever. But so I think we'll just I think we'll just oversimplify it. For simplicity, let's take the definition of evil according to what we know here. So you can imagine good and evil as sort of a binary system, two sides of the coin if you will. We have a term for that: dualism. Now, if we apply the current idea to the Fraxitus, this does make them into a pure villain, right? Not really.
We know for certain, based off of the lore tidbits we've gotten from Phrolova, is that she carries an endless sadness that envelops everyone around her, being silent and somber. And then she bridges the gap between life and death, crafting an ideal world within her heart. And so this is basically a clue that she has a pretty tragic backstory, and the actions that she's taking are meant to go ahead and create some sort of ideal future based off the prior experiences that she's had in the past. And what I view her as is a unit, is a character with a story progression, right? Or a motivation that's going to be focused on the ends justify the means.
Now, there are two major things that he brings in here that I totally agree with when it comes to Phrolova's role as a villain, but let's take the second phrase first. The ends justify the means. This is a concept called as a necessary evil, in which we do an evil or lesser evil so that we avoid an outcome or a greater evil. Whether the choice creates an active or passive effect to the better outcome that is still a lesser evil. This principle is known as the lesser of two evils. So, Imagine a railroad that splits into two tracks. The first road, where the train is currently heading, will go and kill 5 tied people on the track, post memes in general, steal their wife, and finally crash into the White House and accidentally click all the nuclear buttons, causing all the nuclear warheads to launch, causing neighboring countries to also trigger the bombs, and boom, destroying the Earth. But hey, there's a lever. So if you flick this lever, this will move the train tracks to the second track, where the train only has to go to one guy now. So, with this thought in mind, will you pull the lever? You could agree one over the other on this dilemma, but you wouldn't disagree that letting one get a trade might be the better choice versus the entire world being lost. And that brings us to our definition, where it says it is evil as long as the damage is unnecessary. Phrolova may have caused pain and suffering for all the plans of the Tacit Discords going amok and whatever, but if the ends justify the means, no matter what their motives is, does that really make them evil? So sure, that doesn't decline all the experimentation and all the chaos they made that must have been aligned with Scar or whatever, but think about it. That's another key word that Saintontas said in his first phrase that relates to this topic. Motive. Now, if I were to go to punch a child in the face, who's evil? Me or the child? If you hesitated there, you're kind of concerned. But let's say if I go punch a child's face again, just because the child actually stabbed my friend or stole my wife and finally went to the White House and intentionally clicked all the nuclear buttons to bomb the entire world, wouldn't you think my frustration to punching the child's face would be a little bit more justified? Motive. If Phrolova's motivation was caused by a tragic past or such, this means that her reasoning to do all the quote-unquote evil may have been more purpose than just pure intention of destruction like we believe. If said motive is to do better good that outweighs the evil, does that really truly make them evil? With both motive and choice offered on the journey of the antagonist, this creates what we call moral ambiguity, a morally gray character. Now, instead of the binary black and white system that we know, that we already established, now we have a spectrum of morally grayness, where, like, yeah, he killed my dog, but just because the dog was a reincarnation of an evil Austrian painter, or yes, he did blow up a city, but he did that because the city was a group of evil villains that killed his family. Now, not all of these morally gray characters are justifiable and equal, but that does show that the intention of their decisions does not necessarily define them as pure evil. And the fun part? This is a line that we humans have that we think that a person needs to cross before they truly turn evil, but that line varies with every person according to their ideals, morality, and other factors. Morally gray, no? Now, if we go back to Phrolova, Saintontas would mention in his video that a list of things that she did, or crimes that she did, were inherently evil at first glance. Saintontas rebuts this accusation. Saintontas is, wow, why is his name so hard to say? Saintontas rebuts these accusations of crimes as it led the parties into the right direction, which is a bit true considering that Scar did say that we do have the same end goal, just really weird methods. But either way, whether we think her crimes does outweigh the evil that she did, is truly what makes this morally ambiguous.
And build a relationship with, what's her name, Cantarella as well. And that's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. When you look at all of Phrolova's actions as individual pieces, yes, she clearly appears evil because she's technically doing evil things, but when you look at the entire plot as a whole, you'll realize that none of the good things that happen in the plot would have ever been able to occur without her. And so this is what I mean by Phrolova being this ends justifies the means sort of character.
Now, I'm not trying to say that she becomes a good person just because she does it for the greater good. No, I'm just setting up the stage for her moral ambiguity. Do notice that I do say that she isn't evil, so this is where I kind of split my opinion and I go to a tangent and kind of say, yeah, she is kind of a villain, but not necessarily rigidly a villain, just like we already established. But just as we said, moral ambiguity makes the evilness of a person more of a spectrum rather than a binary of two opposite sides. And answering this question with our problem being a spectrum on observation, expecting an answer of binary construct in the form of yes or no, rather I'd say, yes, she is a villain as far as how she represents the organization she stands for, but not necessarily a villain of personal character, or who she is as a person. We need to distinguish this. The reason why is, when it comes to making a playable character, our human nature tends to associate fictional characters is based how they personally stand on what they represent, especially when the story outlines and focuses on them as more of a primary antagonist or a B-plot. If anything, I kind of believe in this current arc that the main antagonists here are closer to the Leviathan or the Order of the Deep, but that's a completely different topic that we don't have to dip our feet on. Now, if we focus on the personality of the character, this affects the overall marketability of the character, what it stands for, and everything personal to them. So the fact that this evilness does not necessarily equate Phrolova's evilness. If anything, the real question is if the writing will recognize her as a villain, and that's the next problem. Our observation does not matter as long as the perception of the story treats her as a villain or not. The reason why, because the moment the story makes us feel that the character is more of a villain or not, it affects the music, the writing, the outcome, the vibe, the marketability, the drip marketing, basically everything. We might still think that she's still a villain because of how we still remember her as, but if the story does not connect and not do her justice in how we believe that she is, or at least make her at least more sympathetic and more agreeable to be able for us to warm up for the change, we will be put off, and that's exactly what people like MarcoMeatball fear. But if that's the case, as of now at 2.4, does the story think that she's a villain? Very specifically, not us, but does the story think she's a villain? No. Not in the slightest. First of all, the fact that this never really gave us this aura of intimidating fear of an evil organization, as their purpose really came more across as a hero with horrible methods or extremists. Extremist groups can tend to become more villain groups, but extremist groups can become villain groups, but while their evil deeds are up in center, so does their justifications. It's like, instead of a focus shot of one character and background characters, you have two of them together. So it comes off as crazy, unhinged men chasing a dream rather than a force of cruelty or hopelessness. This comes into the role of Phrolova. From all the current high-ranking officers of the Fraxitus, she comes out as the most sympathetic and level-headed. Scar is unhinged, and Cristoforo comes across as a madman for his writing, due to his obsession of getting the entire cast to follow his story that he created. Heck, even Phrolova seems to have a bit of a clash in the end of the Act 3 story. Phrolova comes across as more of a servant doing the deeds of her overlords, and yes, while a conductor appears to look like an imposing figure of the authority in an orchestra, they're still shackled by the demands of the music sheet, the composers, the playwrights. Lastly, Phrolova says this:
if we continue to meet as foes, the symphony grows monotonous. I confess I find it rather uninspired.
That is a literal tell that she doesn't want to be villains with us forever. Now, with how the story is being written, Phrolova is at least gonna end up as sort of Loki in Norse mythology, a sort of a protagonist that does follow the tendencies of destruction, but if it benefits her to stop, she might leap into the protagonist side because, you know, in her own words, it feels less monotonous. Pure grey energy. While I do advocate that Phrolova might be a great character, I do hear people say that the CCP would get angry-wengy if they see the playable characters in the roster, so please don't get them sussy backup, please. Ooh. Ooh. Okay. The fear is a bit valid, and possibly the reason why you clicked in this video in the first place. So, while the rule seems to be on play, and Hoyo games like Genshin Impact has a tendency to mellow out villain characters with the likes of the Raiden Shogun, or most of the Fatui in some way, I tried to do a bit of research on myself, and apparently I can't really find anything about it. If anything, most of the research that I find suggests that the law never really existed in game development.
Native Chinese speaker here. Assuming this is not fake news, which I think is a quite big assumption given the Japanese post linked no originals. I just checked the post you linked, and there is not a single mention of CCP in the document here.
The following code here talks about a document that does not necessarily talk about characters not being evil. The main topic of the thread here in Reddit was people fearing if the CCP will change Venti's femboyness. Of course, that's a more pressing issue. So while this document held issues of that, the document also held issues such as... specifically the point, do not make game that let player choose their alignment. Game shouldn't teach people to be bad. Basically, no evil alignment game. What is this translation? This is the main translation of this specific user, so the translation may be not exactly right. They seem to morally tell us that they don't want you as the player to make bad choices, rather than the games making you play playable characters and for them to be good to be playable anyway. So, and the fact that this meeting is more of a speech of a leader than an actual CCP training hearing. So, even if it did say that, it's possible it might have not happened. I don't know, this has been years, so. Anyway, I doubt playable villains are something that he stopped to do in the first place. If you literally play any game other than Hoyo, you would. So then, if there are villains everywhere else, what's going on? Nothing. I don't know. I don't know where people got this. I wish I did. You could correct me in the comments if anyone exactly knows what happened in what's happening in CN about this. Do tell me down there. So the real question is, if it isn't a law or anything, why aren't we getting enough villains? Money's exactly the issue. Some characters just won't pull just because the characters they shows a bit of rudeness to you. CBT Wuwa. Yeah, and some people would just really not pull any character at all because they hate the character for the actions. So why would they really risk making a pure villain playable? Seems like a waste of resources. And considering CBT Wuwa has bad reception on more careful and ruder characters of Yang Yang and Chixia, would you really think that Phrolova would be downright evil to the point that they're unlovable by CN? Oh my gosh, I really am still so salty. Honestly, it's still funny to think that how a rumor shaped everyone's perspective on evil characters, but hey, it seems to affect the money, so I guess they'll sweeten the honey. I hope this clears up the air a little bit. So, in conclusion, does this make Phrolova's fate as a villain a dream? Well, maybe. But hey, I'm here to tell you that just because they might not fit as a pure villain, as long as the writing is good and they don't suddenly change her moral compass and her personality with a Deus Ex Machina or a cop-out, I think I'll be really satisfied. If we go back to the quote that she says, implies that she's willing to side with us whenever she feels like it, but that doesn't mean that she's willing to change her perspective anytime soon and be, purified. And honestly, I think she'll be fine. I just hope she doesn't get grounded into Rover so